Chapter 5. I don't care. I don't care. Can't you idiots understand? I don't care. I want my father to see me like this. All right, Henry. Easy now. Don't call me Henry, you dumb black bastard. Call me Doctor, or I'll break every fucking bone in your... You ain't gonna break nothing, Doctor. Cut, Julian said. Okay, hold it right there. What's the trouble, John? No real trouble, Wilder said. It's just that I think the orderlies oughtn't to be rougher on Klinger. They don't like him. He's a troublemaker. He calls them spades and jigaboos, and they're tired anyway from working the night shift. I want to see them really grab him and yell at him and muscle him around before they shoot him out. Oh, yes, said the man playing Klinger. Yes, that's absolutely right. Mr. Epstein dropped in toward the end of the third afternoon and tiptoed to where Wilder and Pamela stood on the apron of the set, holding a forefinger to his lips. He watched the actors for a while, watched the cameras and the sound apparatus and the lights and the trailing cables and wires. And at Julian's next cut, he said, "Could the three of us step outside?" He led them out onto the rich, sunlit grass. "I've read the script, and I think it's splendid," he said. "And I have every confidence in Julian's direction, assuming the actors and technicians are competent. But I must say, Mr. Wilder, and I certainly don't mean to embarrass you, I must say I think you're the most admirable man in this venture." He paused there, letting the silence fill with the afternoon wind in the trees. To endure an experience like that, to observe it all so acutely despite the wretched emotional state you must have been in, and then in all humility to recapture it, to project it, to find order in the very chaos of it, I find that remarkable. No man had ever spoken to Wilder quite that way. It was enough to make his throat swell and his eyes sting. "Thank you, sir," he said, and Pamela squeezed his arm to emphasize the compliment. "Didn't I tell you he was special?" she said to Epstein. When Epstein walked away, going home, he wanted to follow him. He wanted to join him in that wonderful library for further talk about order and chaos. But Pamela led him back to the barn instead. By the time they got there, the day's work was done, and most of the company was relaxing with cups of wine and excited talk about the movie. "I see Charlie as a kind of Christ figure," a young man was saying. "He's immensely strong and immensely gentle. He does try to save the men, and he..." No, another man said. "Klinger's the Christ figure, the crucified Christ." "Balls," Julian said. "Since when does every movie have to have a Christ figure in it? This movie's about a madhouse, and it's going to stay that way. If anybody wants to read more into it, they're welcome to. That's their business. Maybe it's society in microcosm. I might buy that, but I'm not even going to shove that down their throats. Christ's sake, let the story speak for itself." "Man," Clay Broderick said, you said a mouthful." And John Wilder, the most admirable man in the venture, sat sipping his whiskey and smiling at everyone, enjoying it all. To find order in chaos, why, of course, that was what he'd wanted all his life. Your father didn't believe you either?" "Well, see, he got it from the other kids' fathers. He says, 'Ralph, I want you to tell me exactly what happened up behind that sign.' So I tell him, and he says, 'That's not the way I heard it.' And I says, I swear. He just sits there and looks at me like I'm some kind, I don't know. And ever since then, wait, excuse me, Julian. Cut. What's the matter, John?" "Just that I think the scene might be done a little more subtly. The way it stands now, we all believe Ralph's story. It's a pitiful story of brutality and misunderstanding. And that's okay as far as it goes. But what if we played it so nobody be quite sure whether to believe it or not? I don't want to make Ralph a liar. Nothing that blatant. But I want him to be a very complicated, troubled kid. He's told it this way so many times that maybe even he isn't sure if it's true anymore. I want the audience to sort of read between the lines here. I guess what I'm after is a little, what do you call it? A little ambiguity in this scene. Does anybody see what I mean? Julian did. Right, John. And the boy playing Ralph did too after thinking it over. He and the Negro boy had been recruited from the High School of Music and Art. They were two of the best actors in the cast, and when they played the scene again, it was just what Wilder had hoped for. Man, I mean, that is one tough story. Hey, listen, though. I got an idea. Let's play a game. Let's play pictures. You know how to play pictures, Ralph? Pamela was waiting for him, out of sound range, and she said, "Oh, that was perfect." Well, I don't know about perfect, but I think it's better. "All your ideas are so good," she said. "You really do have a natural talent for this. Want to take a walk?" It was a warm afternoon on the 6th or 7th day of shooting. What he had in mind was to take her out across a meadow and into some woodland that might have a fragrant, mossy clearing where they could rest, and where she might tell him more about his natural talent. "A walk?" she said. "Oh, not now. I don't want to miss a minute of this." A little later, Julian had called for a 10-minute break, and it seemed as good a time as any to suggest an idea that had been taking shape in his mind for days. "Look," he said, "I know how you feel about Christ's symbolism, Julian, but Spivak, or Klinger, does tell about a man who thinks he's the second coming. Says he puts on a show once in a while. And if we're going to mention the man, why don't we ever get to meet him? If he puts on a show, why don't we see it?" Julian said. "What would he do?" Everyone was listening now. "I don't know. He might recite the Sermon on the Mount at the top of his lungs until they shoot him out. Or he might, well, try to crucify himself. That'd be better, but because it's more visual. Get a slim young guy, have him strip down to a loincloth kind of thing, have him climb back up on the bench against the wall and, go into the crucifixion pose until the orderlies have to come and haul him down. See what I'm getting at?" They all waited for Julian to speak first, and he took his time, frowning. "I don't know, John," he said at last. "Might be a little obvious." "Oh, I don't think so at all. The man playing Klinger said, it'd be marvelous if it were done right." "As a matter of fact," Jerry said, I did think of something like that when I was doing the script. Trouble was I couldn't figure out where to put it in." "Think of it in visual terms," one of the actors said. "The audience has been locked into the ward all this time, seeing nothing but ugliness and squalor. And then suddenly, wham, here's this classical image of an irony," someone else said. "A crucifixion in a madhouse. I think it's tremendous. Tremendous." Julian paced the floor a few steps one way, and a few steps another. "I don't like it," he said. "It's cornball." "Cornball?" Pamela cried. "Oh, Julian, you're missing the whole point. It's the most beautiful idea anybody's had yet. It could serve as the objective correlative for the whole... Objective correlative, my ass. I'm sorry, Pam, but I don't see it. That's all." Other strident voices were raised against him. When it was clear that the majority opinion would hold, that Julian would give in, Wilder stole away from the set. He had made his suggestion, and he felt no need to defend it. Now he wanted solitude, and he wanted to be outdoors. He took a cupful of whiskey along, but after the first few sips, he found he didn't want it. He set it carefully on the grass beside the barn and started walking. He had never seen such beautiful country, but it wasn't the landscape alone that increased the pump of his heart as he walked. It was the dizzying rise of his self-esteem in this past incredible week. Epstein saying he was the most admirable man in the venture. Julian deferring to him time and again. Pamela saying, "Oh, that was perfect. And it's the most beautiful idea anybody's had yet." All this and more crowded his head. He had been born for this, for finding order in chaos, and all the wasted years had been a mistake. John Wilder was coming into his own at last. This was reality. And he trembled with a pride and pleasure he hadn't known since he was 11 years old. And the soprano soloist at Grace Church, Gloria in excelsis Deo, to find order in chaos. To find order in chaos. He felt exalted as he trod the grass. He felt tall. The earth was spongy underfoot, and there was hummocks that made him stumble. The stumbling jogged him rhythmically along until a little chant or jingle began to sound in his ears. Even when he stopped and steadied himself with his arm around the trunk of a tree, it persisted. When you meet a man who's spent a half a lifetime in a life he doesn't like or understand, when you find him hugging trees and collapsing at the knees, that'll be the... He let go of the tree. It left a spore of sap on his shirt sleeve and walked again, beginning to feel as if hundreds of needles were gently pricking his flesh. His vision was distorted too. Colorless flecks hung and danced before his eyes. And still the doggerel went on, as real as if someone, Epstein, were whispering the words beside him. If he wants to find an order in his chaos, if he wants to put his passion on the screen, if he comes to me in time and says, "Hi, Mr. Wilder," said one of the minor Marlowe actors on his way to the set. "Hi. Hey, wait. The boy stopped and gave him a long, odd look. "Can you tell me how to get to Mr. Epstein's house?" "Sure. You're headed in the right direction. See that dirt road? Leads you right up to it. It's only a couple of 100 yards. You okay, Mr. Wilder? You look... How do I look? I don't know. And the boy lowered his eyes like a girl. No special way, I guess. Never mind. By the way, I think it's a great film, Mr. Wilder. Really great. He was headed in the right direction. Anyone could walk a couple of 100 yards even with knees like jelly. Now the words were clearly in Epstein's voice. If he comes to me in time and says, "Da-da-da-da-da, dime," that'll be the... He didn't want to look up because he knew the sky had turned from blue to red and yellow. And he didn't want to look back because Pamela and all the young men were gathered there under the massed trees to urge him on. "Keep going, John. Keep going." So he looked down at his own walking feet. These were the feet that had taken him through years and years of error and falsehood. Now they were treading the dirt of the right road at last, the true road, the high, lonely road of self-discovery. "Well, Mr. Wilder," Epstein said, opening his white door. He stepped inside and slumped against the vestibule wall, barely able to stand. He stared into Epstein's calm, wise face, and Epstein peered at him closely, encouragingly, as if he'd been waiting for this very confrontation for years. "Go on, John." The young people behind him were saying, "Go on, say it." But he was paralyzed with indecision. If he said what seemed so clearly to be expected, it might be all over. He would be himself, but he might be... "Yes, sir?" Then he said it. "Brother, can you spare a dime?" And Epstein didn't seem at all surprised. "A dime? Why, certainly. I'll be happy to oblige. Won't you come in while I..." No thanks. I'll wait here." Epstein went into his study for a moment, then he came back. "One thin but very shiny dime," he said, and he looked straight into Wilder's eyes as he gave it to him. Then, smiling, he held out his right hand for a ceremonial handshake. If the dime hadn't done it, the handshake would, and Wilder hesitated again. "Go on, John. Let it happen." Epstein's smile had given way to a troubled look, but his hand was still there, and Wilder shook it. "You're all right, aren't you, Mr. Wilder?" "Yes, I'm all right." He had taken the man's hand at last, and because there should have been a thunderclap of recognition, he provided one, or at least a sound deep in his throat like the tolling of a great bronze bell. Epstein looked puzzled. "I'm afraid I don't... Can I get you a glass of cold water? We have wonderful fresh spring water here. No, no water, nothing. He couldn't move from his slumped position against the wall until he'd made a moist fist around the dime and sunk it deep into the pocket of his wrinkled summer slacks. He was being tested, and he hadn't yet passed the test. There was more to this. There had to be more. "Thank you," he said. His mouth was almost too dry for speaking. "I'm sorry if I..." He turned and walked down the short path to the road, feeling Epstein's eyes on his back. He was careful to go back the way he had come, holding the coin tight against his pocket full of loose change. There had to be more to this, and all at once the weather changed as if to confirm it. The sky darkened quickly as he walked or stumbled. Then there was a quick, brilliant tree of lightning and a roll and a crash of thunder of exactly the kind he'd expected on shaking Epstein's hand. The earthbound trees flew violently in the sudden wet wind. All their leaves turned inside out and pale, and the rain came in a cold pelting that drove him to the nearest shelter. A telephone booth sat in a cement block on the grass beside the road. Now he knew the purpose of the dime, and he knew that Epstein knew it too. When you see a fellow waiting in a phone booth with a dime he doesn't quite know how to use. The overhead light came on when he shut the folding door, but he had to rest on the little bench and wait for his heart to slow down and his throbbing head to clear. Then very carefully he pressed the dime into the tinkling slot. "That'll be the second coming. That'll be the second coming. That'll be the second coming of..." He was dialing, careful to stop after 7 precisely measured digits, and he listened to 10 rings before he hung up and let the coin fall through the machine. Wrong. But if he tried again, it might be right. "Wait," Epstein's voice counseled him. "Wait and have courage, John. There is time." He shut his eyes and 7 vivid numerals appeared behind the closed lids. He dialed them quickly but carefully, and on the 7th ring there was a click. "Hello?" a woman's voice said. "Hello. Are you my mother?" "I'm afraid you have the wrong number." "No, I don't. Please stay on the phone. Listen, I'm doing the best I can to put all this together, and I've only got 1 dime, you see." "Young man?" "Yes, I'm still here, but my time is running out. Please just wait." "Well, I'd like to help you, but I'm afraid you have the wrong..." "Please, just wait. I know you think I'm crazy, but I'm not. I'm very, very serious, and this is important. Wait. I'll get the right question in a minute." "Young man?" "Yes, I'm here. Please don't hang up." She did, and the dime was lost, but that didn't matter. He had plenty of dimes. The only important thing was to keep trying, to try again and again until... There was a rapping on the glass pane, and he looked around to find a young girl standing there. The rain must have stopped because her hair and her clothes were dry. She was trying to open the door of the booth, and he had to get up from the seat to help her. "John, do you know how long you've been in here? Do you know how long you've been in there?" "No. And you haven't even been talking. Just putting in money and dialing it. John, are you all right? And who are you? Are you some kind of half-assed Mary Magdalene?" "Am I what?" "Wait a minute." He closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose with a thumb and forefinger. "Who are you, then? Are you Ginny Baldwin?" Ginny Baldwin was the first girl he had ever loved. If she had said yes to this, it might at least mean he was 17 again, with his whole life ahead of him and all his terrible mistakes unmade. "John, will you stop this? You know me, for God's sake." "No, I don't. What time is it?" "It's almost 6. You mean 6 in the morning or 6 in..." John, if you're kidding, I'll never forgive you for this. You're either kidding or you're... God, come along with me. We're going home. And he allowed himself to be led away across the grass. Then you mean it was all a delusion, he said, trying to keep up with her. What'd you say? I said none of it was real. None of what was real? Never mind. John, do you know who I am now? Do you know where you are and everything? No. No. Well, listen carefully. I'm Pamela Hendricks. It's August 1961, and we're at Marlowe College in Vermont. Vermont? That was when he started to cry, because what she said did have the ring of reality. And if this was real and all the rest was a dream, then he'd made a colossal fool of himself, and everyone at Marlowe College knew it, or would know it soon. He could feel their stares on him as he walked and tried to hide his tears with his knuckles. Stares of contempt and ridicule from the very people whose encouragement he'd felt on the road and in Epstein's doorway. Epstein would be laughing at him, too. Back in the wood-smelling dormitory room, she acted like an efficient nurse. First, she told him to take off all his clothes and to get into bed. Then she came and sat beside him in a creaking bedside chair. John, she said after he'd stopped crying, and it could have been noon or midnight. Are you awake? Yes. If I leave you alone for a few minutes, will you promise not to leave this room? Yes. Now promise me something. All right, dear. She was stroking his brow with cool fingers like a young mother trying to tell her if her child was a fever. If her child has a fever. Whatever happens, promise you won't let them take me away. Oh, of course I promise. I promise, baby. I won't let anybody take you anywhere. Hours seemed to pass after that. Was he awake or asleep? Until there was a light knock at the door, and Epstein's voice said, Mr. Wilder? Wait a second. He sprang for the closet, got his pants, and pulled them around his nakedness before he let the man in. What can I do for you? He said. Nothing at all, thanks. Epstein sat down in a chair against the wall. Frankly, Mr. Wilder, I only came over because I'm concerned about you. Oh, you are, huh? Well, that's pretty funny because I'm concerned about you. I mean, I may be an imposter, but you're worse. Do you know that all the kids in this college call you God? That they call you God the Father? Epstein's little chuckle was infuriating. Oh, no. In the first place, I don't believe that for a minute. And secondly, I don't see what it has to do with... Oh, you don't, huh? It has everything to do with everything. Listen. Listen to me. Don't philosophy professors ever listen? Or do they just talk? First of all, there have been altogether too many religious jokes flying around this campus these past however long it's been. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Terror, stuff like that. Tell me you haven't heard of him and I'll call you a liar. I'll call you a few other things while I'm at it, Epstein. I'll call you a sanctimonious old fraud, and I don't care how many books you have in your famous library. If I knew you better, I think I'd be able to call you a dirty old man, too. Kinda like it up here, don't you? Oh, Marlowe casts a spell, all right. All these sweet little girls coming back every fall just dying to impress the old teacher any way they can. I've got your number, Epstein. Wait, let me finish. And he did finish, though it took him a long time. At one point, Epstein said, I'm afraid I'll have to leave now, and the door clicked shut behind him. But Wilder went on talking to the empty room. First smoking all the available cigarettes and trying in vain to find the liquor, then going to the sink and cupping up many handfuls of cold water to his mouth like a man dying of thirst. He called Epstein every ugly name he could think of. He blamed Epstein for everything that had gone wrong in his own life and asked Epstein to defend himself against these charges. And he went on talking until he collapsed in the bed again. Some time later, there were voices outside the door. He heard Epstein talking, and Pamela's voice in tears, and the low, courteous voices of 2 or 3 other men he didn't recognize. When a pair of strong arms helped him to stand at last, it seemed an act of great kindness. So did the hypodermic needle sunk into one buttock. After that, he was somehow fully dressed again, and a number of people were helping him into the back seat of a big automobile. And after that, there was nothing but silence as the car bore him away. He wept a little as he rode. Then he gave in to the heavy waves of sleep as deep as drowning. The first thing he knew, on waking, was that he wasn't at Marlow College anymore. All the smells were different here, and the woman who sat beside him wasn't Pamela. She was old, with blue-white hair, wearing a nurse's uniform and reading a paperback novel. "Miss?" She laid her book aside and inspected her watch before answering. "Yes, sir." "Can you tell me where I am?" "Elizabeth Fanning Hospital." "Where's that?" "Middlebury, Vermont. How you feeling today, Mr. Wilder?" I can't move my... Don't move that arm, sir. You'll upset the IV." And she got up quickly to make sure he didn't move it again. His hand was taped to a gauze-wrapped board from which a length of clear plastic tubing rose to what must have been an intravenous feeding bottle above his head. The aluminum crib sides of the bed were up as if someone had been afraid he might fall out. "What happened to me?" "I really don't know, sir. I'm only the morning shift, you see." "Try and relax now. I just want to make a note of when you woke up. Then I'll check your temp and your blood pressure and whatnot. Do a few little things like that. I don't think we're going to need that old IV much longer. We'll see what doctor has to say about that. I think we're well past the worst of it anyway, Mr. Wilder. I have a feeling you'll be up and around in no time." "What's that stack of papers?" "Oh, those are just your nursing bills. You've been on 24-hour nursing care, you see. Private nursing. And the bills do mount up, but I wouldn't worry about that now. You have Blue Cross, don't you?" "I guess so." "Well, then, you see, I'll tell you one thing, Mr. Wilder. Far as I'm concerned, you've been a model patient. Of course, I'm only on mornings and I can't speak for the other girls, but what little I've seen, you've been grand. Just grand. Not a speck of trouble, morning after morning. You talked quite a lot, but that made it interesting." "I did? What did I talk about?" "Oh, all kinds of things. I couldn't always follow it, but it was interesting." He must have fallen asleep to the sound of her voice, because when he opened his eyes, another nurse, much younger and wearing glasses, was standing in the room. "You have a visitor, Mr. Wilder." And there she was, as fresh and beautiful as ever, wearing a bright summer dress and so eager to clasp his hand as she sat down that some of the private nursing bills spilled from the bedstand. "Oh, you look so much better," she said. And then she did her best to bring him up to date. "First of all, the shooting was finished. Wasn't that wonderful? All that remained was for Julian to get a little exterior footage of Bellevue back in town and then to edit the film. That would take time, of course, and to make arrangements to have it scored. Personally, she thought it would be more effective without music, but Julian wanted recorders and guitars, and they'd have an honest-to-God movie in the can. But everybody's been terribly concerned about you," she concluded. "It was all I could do to keep them all from coming over here." "Tell me something. I mean, I still haven't put it all straight in my head." He knew better than to ask the next question, but he asked it anyway to test her. "Why am I here? What exactly did happen to me?" "You really don't know?" She lowered her voice. "You had a nervous breakdown, baby. A whopper." And he listened very closely while she gave her version of it, to find out how much she knew about the Christ delusion. Apparently she knew nothing at all, nor had she guessed anything. "And the last thing you said when I left to try and find Jerry or Julian or somebody, the last thing you said was, 'Don't let them take me away.' Do you remember that?" He said he did, very dimly, and he continued to listen as carefully as any police investigator, as carefully as any psychiatrist, as her light, pretty voice hurried on. And when I got back, I found Mr. Epstein sitting on the steps outside our door, smoking his pipe and looking as calm as an old priest or something. He said he'd called Elizabeth Fanning here and asked them to send over some people to get you. I said, but that's one thing I promised him. And he put his arm around me and said, Pamela, my responsibility is more important than your promise. Wasn't that sweet? Very sweet. And he said he knew you were a good, sensitive man, but that these things just happen sometimes, to the best of us. And the older I grew, the better I'd understand. You sure that's all he said about me? Good and sensitive? Oh, I guess he used a few other words, too. All very complimentary. He really likes you a lot, John. You mustn't worry about that. Oh, and one funny thing. When the hospital people were taking you out to the car, you pulled yourself up very straight as if you were going to make a speech, and you said, I have never depended on the kindness of strangers. Did I really say that? Yes. Why? Because it's from a play. It was a woman's last line in A Streetcar Named Desire, only it's a paraphrase. In the play, the woman says it when the people from the asylum come to get her. Only she says, I have always depended on the kindness of strangers. You really are something, John. That's exactly what Mr. Epstein said he thought it was, only he wasn't sure. And he's the most learned, well-read person I know. By dinner time that night, he was sitting up and eating from a tray. The next day, they gave him slippers and let him sit in a chair when Pamela came. And at the end of visiting hour, they let him walk her slowly down the hall. Just a moment, Mr. Wilder. You can't go any farther than that. I'm sorry, but this is a locked ward, you see. It must have been the next morning when the psychiatrist came to his room. A very young man whose striped boxer shorts showed plainly through the translucent white nylon of his uniform. How you doing? He asked. Okay, I guess, but listen, doctor, I have more questions than you can possibly answer all at once. Have you ever dealt with a man who thought he was Christ? Because that's what happened to me. At the peak of my breakdown, I thought I was turning into some kind of Messiah, a second coming of Christ. The doctor eased one haunch onto the windowsill and began playing with the cord of the Venetian blind. And I mean, I know that's pretty bad. That's crazy. And I know you're going to recommend I see a psychiatrist back in New York, but that's out. He was short on breath, his mouth was dry, and he felt his features contorting into a tight, pugnacious grimace, as if his lifelong combination of Mickey Rooney and Alan Ladd had become a deathbed James Cagney. The thing is, I can't be psychoanalyzed, doctor. I've tried it, and I know. It just doesn't take with me. Maybe it's my fault, but whether it's my fault or not isn't the point. The point is it simply doesn't work. Can you understand that? I think so. The doctor was examining the Venetian blind cord as if it were an uncommonly interesting piece of string. As a matter of fact, Mr. Wilder, I don't put too much stock in that kind of treatment myself, but that's because I'm prejudiced. I was trained by one of the pioneers in a new school of psychiatry, drug therapy, chemicals, pills. Our common tranquilizers were only the beginning back in the 50s. Now we have a wide range of medications. Antidepressants, psychic energizers, antipsychotics, drugs to take you up, bring you down in any number of subtle, medically controlled ways. And the field is getting more sophisticated every day. Had Wilder even heard of Myron T. Brink? Well, he certainly might have if he paid attention to Time magazine, on whose cover Dr. Brink's picture had recently appeared. This was the man he had mentioned earlier, the drug therapy man who'd been such an inspiration to have him as a student. Brink now spent much of his time as a world traveler, taking his new kind of psychiatry to foreign nations. Just last month, he'd been decorated by the Republic of South Africa for his work in greatly reducing the country's mental patient population. And that was only the latest in many such honors. But he still maintained a small private practice in New York on the Upper East Side. When he was away, his patients were served by one or another of his three-man staff, all competent men. And one minor advantage in working with Dr. Brink was that his fees were very reasonable. Was Wilder interested? Of course, I can't promise that he'll take your case, the doctor concluded, but we can try. I'll write to him today. Now, you want to tell me something about yourself, Mr. Wilder? Apart from the fact that you thought you were Christ, I mean? Could this amiable youth really be a psychiatrist of whatever school? That was what Wilder kept asking himself as his voice gained strength and confidence in answering the simple questions. It was all a little too good to be true, like coming up to Marlowe with Pamela and like Pamela herself. Maybe after all these years, his luck really had begun to change. And why not? Wasn't it about time? Hadn't he served a long enough apprenticeship among the losers of the world? Guess what? Pamela said breathlessly one morning. You're being discharged this afternoon. Good thing I brought you all your stuff, isn't it? I've been bringing all our luggage every day just in case. How are we going home? In the car? Heavens no, that would take forever. It's a rented car, remember? We'll take it over to Middlebury Airport and fly home. Come on, and walk in the hall with me, or maybe they'll let us go downstairs and walk on the grounds. Have I told you what a beautiful day it is? It's an absolutely gorgeous day. Only then, with the news of this gorgeous day, did he think of his wife. He had promised to be home from Boston in 2 weeks, and now it had been nearly 3. It was still early when they got to the airport. Tommy would be in school, and he shut himself into a phone booth with a sense of being a small, guilty boy. Janice, listen. I'll be home in a couple of hours. I'm at the Boston airport now. The thing is, I've been sick. I've been hospitalized, and I couldn't call till now. It's all right, she said. We didn't expect you. What do you mean you didn't expect me? Don't you think Tommy and I have learned not to expect very much of you? Sweat was sliding down his ribs under his summer suit. I don't think that's fair. Doesn't it matter to you that I've been in the hospital? Yes, I hope you're better now. You must be, or they wouldn't have let you out. Janice, All right, John. We'll see you when you get here.